Hi, friend. Welcome to another episode of In the Unfolding of Becoming.
I'm your host, Erica.
Today, we're joined by Yulia, and Yulia has a great story to share with us today around her unfolding. How are you doing today? How's your weekend been? It's currently Sunday.
It's wonderful. I just came back from a work trip from a trade show and it's been awesome, very productive. But I feel very grateful to be spending Sunday morning with you here.
Welcome back home.
Yeah.
Glad you had safe travels. So, Yulia, I always like to start off an episode with a guest by asking them what the unfolding means to them. And just to give you some context, the way I define the unfolding in this podcast is a transition period where you've started a new chapter, but have not yet quite arrived at the end of that chapter and becoming who you're intending to become. But I would ask you, what does unfolding mean to you?
When I learned for the first time that you started this unfolding podcast, I immediately felt this urge to be here because for me, the unfolding is the big part of my personal growth and my life. You define it as unfolding. I define it as life recalibrating. Think of it as getting to the next level in your life. You know that your life is not going to be the same or look the same as it was, but you also don't know exactly what it's going to look like once you're out of it.
Mm.
When I first thought of being a guest in your podcast, I thought that, oh, actually, I'm not ready. Maybe I should wait until I go through my unfolding and I'm going to be in a better place mentally. I'm actually going to be there where I want to be. And then I can share my journey. And then I realized that that's going to defeat the whole purpose of your
Yeah.
podcast. What is hopefully inspiring and empowering for other people, for your listeners, will be to hear from someone who's in the thick of it, someone who is actually in the middle of this unfolding. And that's the hardest part when you're still not there where you want to go. That's why I'm here now, because I'm in the thick of it.
Exactly. And I want to double click on everything you said, but what specifically stood out to me was you defined the unfolding as life recalibrating. And that is just two words, but it's such a beautiful phrase because that is exactly what it feels like in my experience when I'm going through a transition. Life is recalibrating, and I like to have the mindset of it's recalibrating towards something that you said, a next level up. So I love that. And then also we'll acknowledge what you just said around the courage and the strength that it takes to show up, especially to be in a podcast recording when you are in the thick of it, when you are not performing, when you are not, quote, all put together. It takes so much more courage to be in it and say, this is where I'm at. And you know what? It's messy, and there are days when it's good, and there are days when it's challenging. What I would ask is, what are you going through that you are currently in the thick of?
Having gone through a divorce, which was my decision, making the decision to separate from my partner of 12 years of a 10-year long marriage. I have two beautiful kids, and making the decision to walk away from the person that you still love and deeply care about took a lot of courage. I am still in the phase of learning to live not as a wife, not as a partner, but adjusting my life as a single woman, as the mother of two children, and overall just learning how to live with that void. As much as I don't like the word void, for a person like me, I eventually want to have a partner. I enjoy sharing the experience of life with a partner. And I'm getting close to 1 year after the separation. Even though it's 12 months is a long period of time, I still cry most of the days. There's probably been a handful of days since then that I didn't cry. It's a work in progress, it's a journey, and I'm excited to share some of the things that help me feel grounded and feel whole.
Wow, that is a big one because you touched on a couple of things that I think are truly relatable. And we've all had an ending of some sort of relationship, whether that be a marriage, whether that be a long term romantic relationship, a friendship, maybe a family member that we no longer speak to. It's hard because it's a form of grief, even though the person is still alive. The second thing that you said was around identity, rediscovering who you are not as a wife, which was a part of your identity for a decade, but learning what is your identity now. Before we talk about your transition of identity, let's talk about the grief. You mentioned that you still cry quite a bit. What has that process looked like for you? Sometimes when you think you've outbeat grief, it comes back and just jabs you so unexpectedly.
I'm going to get really vulnerable here and share the process that I went through. When I was going through this, I actually didn't know that it's a very, very common path or scenario of women who get out of a long term marriage and how they handle this. But what I learned is that the marriage doesn't end overnight. And usually, when you start having thoughts about getting a divorce, that happens months or even years before you actually take your foot out of the door. It's actually very common for a person to grieve the relationship when they're still there. They're still living in that same house with the person they're married to. But by the time I was out of the door and I was in my own place, I've already done a lot of grief and healing. So when I was out, guess what? I was open, ready, and excited to find my new love. You are so liberated. You feel like life is giving you a new chance to meet someone who's actually going to be meant for you long term. That's exactly what happened to me. I moved out. I haven't been in a dating world for very long. I do not think I came out of this marriage with trauma. It was my decision. I am grateful for my partner of 12 years. Me with completely untraumatized heart, I was open. And what I learned is that actually this is very common for people to come out of the marriage and jump pretty quick into a relationship because you don't really have your guards up. I opened myself to a romantic emotional connection that lasted almost 6 months. And unfortunately, that did not work out as I saw it. And where I'm going with all this is many people have to go through this first breakup after a divorce. And it's actually very common for it to be one of the most painful ones. Some people may be like, well, how can you be caring about a breakup of 5, 6 months long relationship versus the 12-year long relationship? But the thing is that once you meet someone who gives you all the things that your marriage didn't give you, you see the future. Losing that potential of the happy future, and hey, finally, there's a person who actually can love me the way I want to be loved. And when that crashes and that breaks your heart, you're going through two big heartbreaks at the same time. And that's exactly what happened to me. And later I learned that it's actually very, very common. There are exceptions. Of course, there are relationships that start right after the divorce and they end up in a second marriage, for example. But unfortunately, usually when women come out of the divorce, they're so open and they're so ready for a relationship that they don't have their guards up high enough to protect their heart. And that got me in a pretty challenging place. I got the depression, I got anxiety, and I was able to overcome those in a fairly short amount of time and bounce back without medication. So I'm really proud of myself and my courage.
One of the things that stood out to me is something that I've heard a lot of people, both men and women, who have gone through divorce. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people who have gone through a divorce where they say, that the grieving really took place during the last couple of years in the marriage, that it was a grieving process done in isolation, but also under the same roof.
Absolutely.
That is something very common that I hear a lot, as well as when the separation and the divorce comes through. And again, I've heard it both from men and from women that there's a sense of freedom and relief. Relief is a strong word that people use that comes up a lot, and an excitement and a hope for what's to come, because now you're opening yourself to a form of joy and happiness that you weren't necessarily experiencing at the amount that you wanted to while married. And then you bring up, okay, so now I'm divorced, I'm separated, I open up my heart, I meet somebody who I have a connection with, a really special connection. It doesn't work out. And I am now grieving that alongside with my divorce simultaneously. And I want to unpack that because I think it goes to the point that you can start a grieving process long before you're separated, and you can have these feelings of excitement and enthusiasm and freedom. Then something else can happen that does not go as planned or how you wish it would have turned out. That blow hits and it makes you realize, I'm actually still grieving that. That both of these things can exist simultaneously. You can have joy and excitement and freedom, and you can also have grief just come like a wave when something else unrelated happens and show its face to you and say, no, you are still not done processing this grief and it's going to accumulate. So not only are you still going through the transition of grieving your separation and an end of a marriage, but now you'd open up your heart, this other possibility that was bringing you a lot of hope and excitement. Because to your point, it's proving, hey, the person who I want as a partner does exist. But guess what? Life is telling you, but it's not this person. So then that's another hit as you are navigating this multiple grief. You mentioned having feelings of depression, feelings of continuing to grieve. And it sounds like your mode of being able to get through this was one without medication, which, friend, listener, if you're going through this and in your journey and you're unfolding, you need to rely on medication and that's your best journey. That's perfectly fine. We always encourage you to talk to a licensed professional and get whatever you need to meet your needs. But back to your story, Yulia, you were able to get out of this in a way that didn't rely on meds. How did you do it? Because when grief hits and depression hits, it's hard to get out of bed.
Yes, that's a loaded question. Depression is real. And I just want to encourage everyone to be kind to others because we never know the battles other people are fighting. In fact, just a few days ago, we found out that one of my clients who became a friend took her life and she was going through divorce and struggling with the depression. And I would have never known that she was struggling that much. So just a reminder for everyone, be kind. You never know what people are going through, like mental issues. They're real. I want to spend most of the time on this podcast on one thing that helped me the most. And actually, ironically, and I didn't realize it until last night when I was preparing for this, what helped me the most was reading and listening to podcasts that talk about things that I'm going through. When many of us are in these situations throughout our life, at least once or twice, we think it's so lonely and it's so unique and no one else can understand or relate what we're going through. And actually, that's not true because we all go through similar experiences. And just to give an example, I think I am a very strong woman, being through two miscarriages and between having my children. And that again was an example of going through something and being lonely in this journey. And I didn't know how common is having a miscarriage. And it's actually normal aspect of fertile age and having children, right? Once I started sharing about it, I found out that so many other women actually went through this, and I was mind blown. And I was like, why was I not talking about this? I was just like grieving and processing it all inside me. So this time when I was going through divorce, I actually took a different path and I told myself, I don't want to be alone in this. And I actually posted about it on my social media. I shared this experience and I was so shocked how many people and friends and colleagues, my family, that just showed up for me and were there for me to talk, to support, to listen. My clients, existing and former clients, just people that I didn't even think would even care about this, but they were there for me. And I was glad that I was not going through this alone. Whether it's depression or anxiety or just grief or loneliness, these are all normal human reactions. For example, with anxiety of being like, oh my God, now I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. And then your body just gets into this panic mode. That's normal. But what you do is you learn the techniques, for example, like delayed worry, when you say, hey, right now I'm working, I have my work calls, I need to take care of certain things. I'm going to think about it later in the evening. And then you allocate certain time at the end of the day, whether you need to cry, read a podcast, go to a run, talk to a friend, or even just like allow that sadness to take over you. Just simple concept of delayed worry, but that did a huge thing for me. And then I learned a lot of concepts to help you go through the separation and learning to be whole when you're single through books and podcasts. And one of them was the concept of get better, not bitter. It's very important to be grateful for your past. It's very important to be grateful to the people that were in your life. And despite the pain or despite someone doing something that hurts you, still not have that anger. Any anger or resentment is a poison that poisons your whole system, poisons your heart. It was my intentional choice to keep my heart kind, gentle, and loving no matter what happens. And I know for some people it's hard to forgive someone. And honestly, you don't always have to forgive, but I think it's important to let go and just be grateful for the love that person gave you instead of getting bitter.
I wanted to acknowledge your friend's passing. I'm so sorry that happened. I think it talks about the importance of having these conversations. I think you're right that oftentimes a lot of people feel lonely, and it's not just you and I guessing. There's a lot of articles and statistics out there and study after study that have shown that people feel alone. I think when people are going through an unfolding, through a transition that feels really heavy, it's important to have these type of conversations. So thank you, Yulia, for being courageous enough to come on and talk about your story, because I guarantee you that there will be somebody at the other end of this listening, going through something similar and feel less alone. You also mentioned that podcast helped you feel more connected. There's a beautiful quote by an author, James Baldwin. I don't want to butcher it, but please Google it afterwards if you're interested, where he talks about how he always felt so alone until he started reading books. And in reading books, he saw that what connects us is a feeling that we all have at some point in our lives, that that's always a common thread. So when you're feeling really sad or feeling grief, that is what connects us to other people, is that they've also experienced those feelings before.
100%.
And then you were sharing around the importance of delayed worry. And what I really appreciated about that is that by making the conscious choice to have delayed worrying, you're also giving yourself permission to break down. You're making that choice to say, right now, I really need to be present here. I really need to take my kids to school. But when I come back, I'm going to have permission to feel my feelings and to break down and to experience those feelings so that they can run through me instead of resisting them. I love that concept of delaying it, but also allowing yourself in that moment to have permission from yourself to go there. which can be really scary to give
Yes.
yourself that
Yes,
permission.
yeah, but it's very, very powerful. And I think not everyone has the skill to do that. We're all wired differently. And I don't want to get into the different attachment styles, right? Some of us are more anxious, some of us are more dismissive, and like usually the dismissive type of personalities, they tend to suppress those feelings. And for me, it was a conscious choice to face those feelings, to allow myself to feel them and not feel like that makes me any weaker. Face the heartbreak, face the pain, because I know something beautiful is going to come out of it. I do not suppress it. I face it with courage.
And that does take a lot of courage because, as a former avoidance, I will say that it took a lot of practice for me to continue going there and feeling the feelings. But to your point, for some people, it might be more their default. But for those who, like me, are recovering avoidance, what I will share is if you have an intentional practice about saying, I'm staying. And those two words will be a phrase if you've listened to the last episode, because we just talked about that in the last episode that aired previously. I'm staying, right? I'm going to show up for myself. If you get into the practice of reframing it, not as I'm going to get stuck in these feelings and never be able to get out, but no, I'm going to show up for myself. Because it
Yes.
is true that the way you show up for yourself is how you teach others to show up for you. So if you're constantly running away from the difficult feelings and not facing yourself, you're allowing that to be okay for your needs not to be met. And when you want to have people in your life, whether it be romantically, platonic way, your family members, your coworkers, you do want to be met, right? I know I want to be met.
Yeah.
So you have to start by meeting yourself. And then the other thing that you said was, I believe it's a book you read, Get Better, Not Bitter. You tied that back to gratitude. That's also a very important practice. I will accept life as it is. And I also will be grateful for how it has shaped me and what it has done for me versus what it has done to me. So, can you share a little bit about what your gratitude practice has been like?
Yes, that part of gratitude that I experience, that's a conscious choice. I tied to another concept, which I call it power of narrative. When things happen, right, there are so many ways to frame that narrative because when we look at our past, you can tell yourself, hey, this happened to me. That was so unfortunate. That was misfortune. This person did that, and that circumstance didn't work out. And that will be true. That same experiences or things that happen, you can totally reframe it and say, hey, this happened for me to learn this or experience this or uncover that side of me or make me feel certain way that I didn't even know that I'm capable of feeling. And that will be your narrative. And guess what? The best part of this is we get to decide. Each of you gets to decide what narrative we tell ourselves and we believe in. So that's where my narrative of making the choice of being grateful for the things that happen to me because they are my lessons. And then another concept that comes out of it, I call it the concept of tourists in your life. Some people come into our life and they stay for decades. Not everyone is going to be like that. Some people come into our life at a certain season and they're visitors. It's up to you again. What picture do you paint? Why did that person come into my life, right? Because these people are very often our mirrors of who we are at that stage or that phase, that season of our life. That's the power of seeing, okay, this person came into my life to show me side of me that I didn't even know exists, right? And that's exactly how I look at my previous relationship. It helped me experience life in such a colorful way and make me feel so happy as a kid experiencing adventures, outdoors, travel, the things that I forgot how to experience. When the person is not in your life anymore, you may feel like, oh my God, I don't have this in my life. Those things that you experience and you learn how to feel, they actually have nothing to do with that person. They are in you. I had to learn to do those things alone. And I kind of mastered that. I had the dream to learn how to snowboard this winter. And I wanted to do it with that person, but I didn't have him in my life anymore. So one night back in November, I was like, I'm just going to go alone. I'm going to prove to myself that I can sit in a car and drive 3 hours and go snowboarding for the whole day on my own. I'm going to rent the equipment. I'm going to get a class and I'm going to do it. And guess what happened later? Then I told my friends about it. I was so excited. I have my Tahoe snowboarding crew now, a group of friends that we've been going a few times this season. And I'm so proud of myself. I was able to do it. So that's just like one small example of that person can be in your life for a short period of time, but they help you discover the capacity of, again, your narrative.
I also believe, similar to you, that our perspective is our reality. Whatever you believe is what you will create and what is reflected back to you, whether that be through the people you meet or the experiences that come into your life. And like you, I also believe that everything is a mirror that you can learn from and say, okay, this is where I'm at, because you can't control everything that comes to your life, but you can absolutely control your response to it. And that in itself is very telling. You chose to say, okay, I'm going to master really crafting, being grateful and appreciative, and having a mindset that this all just means that things are working out in my favor for a purpose that I might not yet recognize, but that I'm going to have, this is important to say, I'm going to have faith that that is the case. I may not know exactly how yet, but I believe that this is a good thing for me. I do believe that then that's what you start to create. However, I will say, for somebody who's really depressed, when shit's hitting the fan and everything's going haywire, it can be very challenging to say, this is happening for me. I can't pay my bills, but it's happening for me. So, in those moments when you're at your lowest and you want to have that faith, you want to have that mindset, you want to reframe, you want to have gratitude, but you also want it to be authentic and not forceful. How did you start out getting to that place when you didn't necessarily believe it in that moment?
You fake it till you make it and you keep trying and you're going to trip and that's okay. You're going to stumble. You're going to have horrible days when you feel like there's no reason to get out of bed. I'm not saying it's easy and I don't want this to look like, oh, I got it all together. Not even close. And I think just knowing that it's going to be a journey, a work in process. And we all have different nervous systems. Some people just feel more severely, and I fall in that category. There's certain people that are just hyper aware. And no matter how strong we are, it's just going to be the lifelong journey of learning to train your nervous system. And that's not the concept of nervous system flexibility. You can train your nervous system to adapt. It's very similar to how we train our muscles in the gym. Anyone can learn it. It just takes time, effort, discipline. Again, faith, as you said, you have to believe because I don't know exactly what's ahead of me. Most of us, we don't know, as you're saying. We know there's light at the end of the tunnel, but we don't see that light. And I like to say, like, why we don't see the light? Because life has turns. There's no straight path. Our path on finding peace and getting to that place in our life when we feel happy and fulfilled, it's not a straight tunnel. There's going to be many, many turns, many curves. And sometimes that turn is literally the next day. But we don't know that. We have to get there and turn. Just believing that there is light there. Even if you don't see it, it is there. And it's going to be hard, and that's okay. You will cry. You will feel maybe like a failure on certain days, but it's also important not to put yourself in a victim position. There's one story that I want to share that I really like that differentiates the victim position and the position of giving other people grace and gratitude and not poisoning your own mindset.
You're right. Things can absolutely change in a second. We can walk out of here in an hour in our lives could be drastically different with one call, one text, one action. We just don't know. And I think another thing that I would say to you, friend who is listening, is start out with something that is believable. If you don't know how you're going to repair a relationship or you don't know where you're going to get money to do X, Y, and Z, if it's a really hard day, start with something small that could be possible that you believe in. If it's a really difficult day, you can start off by saying, I know that today I will find joy in cooking a meal that is within your control. You can make it happen and you know it's going to bring you joy. And then start building up. Maybe tomorrow it's a less hard day. I know today is going to be a good day because I have people around me who I love and I'm going to have a conversation with them and then get bigger. If today is a good day, then the week can be a good week until you get to a point where it doesn't feel forceful, but it feels like, oh, this is a possibility. Because now you have a couple of days where you started out small and those proved to be true. It's so much easier said than done, especially when you're in a moment where it's hard, where life is hard, and we all have those moments. But it is, like Yulia said, a working out that muscle of starting out small, starting out where it feels comfortable, starting out where it feels true to you, something that you can believe. What can you believe that might be at a smaller scale? And then build up to the place where you want to go. Just a tip around that. But I want to go back to Yulia in your story of where you're at now. And you said that you have a story to share with us around not being the victim, but being really empowered. Let's go there and tell us where you're
I
at.
love it. And honestly, this is not my story. This is the story that I carry in my memory, in my heart, because it really helps me get through what I'm going through right now. And I don't know if any of the listeners have heard about this. Have you heard about the story of a butterfly and a scorpion?
No, I
No?
don't think so.
I love it. So let me read it. It's pretty short. So here's the story. A butterfly landed beside a scorpion. She wasn't afraid. He'd never met anything so gentle. She said, "You don't scare me." No one ever said that to him. So he followed her, carefully, slowly, hiding his sting behind his back. They spent days together. She showed him flowers, sunlight, softness, things he never knew existed. One evening she said, "I wish you could fly with me." He looked at his happy body, his sharp tail, and whispered, "I wish I could too." That night, while she slept, I'm gonna make me cry. That night, while she slept beside him, his tail twitched, a reflex, a habit, a nature he hated. The butterfly walked with pain in her wings. She looked at him, heartbroken. "You said you wouldn't hurt me." He cried. "I didn't mean to." The butterfly whispered, "I know." And with trembling wings, she flew away, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Not everyone who hurts you is trying to. Some are fighting battles you can't see. But love cannot grow where someone's nature keeps breaking your wings.
Mm,
The way I look at this story, and it's so easy to blame Scorpio, right? Such
mhm,
an asshole.
mhm.
But what's the problem here? Then the butterfly is just putting herself in a victim position, and it doesn't really get her anywhere. And again, not to make excuses for people to say, "Oh, it's okay to hurt other people." I'm not making excuses, right? We're all adults, we make conscious choices. But what helps me thinking about my relationships that don't end in the lifelong partnerships as I would want them to is just understanding that simply not everyone is capable to love the same way you can. And some people have their wounds, they have their childhood trauma. Not everyone can give you what you want. So that's one thing. And then another thing is, what could a butterfly have done differently? Well, what can she do next time so she doesn't get stung? And that's where I think about giving people who you allow in your life You need to give them time because people reveal themselves. And when you don't allow enough time, you can get hurt because you simply didn't give enough time. So the lesson I learned is to take a step back and observe. And sometimes even the actions are not enough. You really need time to see the person, to get to know them. And it can be a friend, it can be a romantic partner, right? It doesn't have to be just in the lens of the romantic relationship, but you need to protect yourself. And that's the wisdom I'm developing and learning, that I cannot be naive, open heart all the time. I need to set my boundaries. Or someone who's like me assumes the best in people, still do that, but take the time.
What I like about that story and what you said that I want to highlight is for the story itself, as you read it, what kept coming up was do not internalize somebody's inability to show up for you the way you need them to show up. Do not internalize that to mean something about you. They are two
Nothing to do
separate
with you.
things. Does not mean that you're not enough, doesn't mean that you're not chosen. The story very clearly says it's not about you. It has nothing to do with you. So I love that about that story. And then about yourself, where you say, what can I learn from this? What I really appreciated about it is that you didn't say, I learned that I needed to change who I am. You didn't say, I shouldn't have an open heart. I shouldn't be soft. What you said is, I should give it more time because your story and access to you is a privilege. So, continued access and closeness, and this goes for everybody. Your life, yourself, that is a privilege for people to have access to that. So, giving it time to unfold and to evolve in a way that feels really natural versus looking at it as this is what I was missing in my marriage. This is what I'm seeing in this person, let me just run with it full force. What you're saying is, it's not that I would have changed who I was, it's that I would have let it unfold in a way that was more authentic versus trying to grasp onto it.
Exactly. Because authentic is sustainable.
Yeah,
I think it is a better choice for anyone to be their authentic selves. You can sustain that.
exactly. 100%. If you're performing and not being authentic, that performance will eventually become so exhausting that it will not be sustainable. I want to end by asking you, how are you doing today with your unfolding?
I don't want to pretend that I got it all figured out and I got it all together, right? It just wouldn't be true. But I feel so much more grounded. I feel stronger and I feel like it's just getting better and better. I do believe that life gets better and better because we become wiser through our experiences. We appreciate more. I think as you get older, you realize the time you have in this world is limited. So I've never been this much aware. Life feels so much more colorful and more real for me. But I would say the reason that it does feel like that is not just because of the podcasts and the books I read. I surrounded myself with friends, with people that I can lean on, that can hold me on my bad days, that I can have fun with, but also someone who can listen to me. And that's what I didn't have before. I really have that community of friends. So that is huge, huge, huge. So for anyone who doesn't have that, please invest your time and find the people who can inspire you and be there for you. It's so important. Another thing is find a hobby that makes you forget about your problems and your identity. For me, it is dancing. When I dance, I feel like I'm in the flow. And that's not a concept that I learned this year. What that means is that if you feel in the flow, you literally forget about time. When you forget about time, that means you found something you really enjoy. It's really good for your heart, for your soul. Find the time for the hobby that makes you feel you're in the flow. Another thing is exercising. For those who are listening to Erica's podcast, if your nervous system tends to be a little bit more anxious, like mine, do weights, exercise. And there's actually a study that was done that if you become more denser, your muscles become stronger. Actually, that has a positive effect on your nervous system. Like, you just feel stronger, more confident in ourselves. And lastly, I would say I wouldn't have been where I am now without the therapy. I did individual therapy, I did group therapy. It's really important to find a therapist that's the right fit for you. I will just end with a few thoughts that I want everyone to remember, that you are not what happens to you, but you are what you make out of it. And you get to decide that. And whether you are single, going through a breakup, divorce, it's important to be patient and let life do the job. And things will come to you when they are meant to. Surrender, because you can only control how you respond, how you react. Everything else is out of your control. The world just needs more people like you, Eric, and kind, empowering, and just making others in your life feel seen and important. So I really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you,
Having me
Yulia. And I appreciate you for sharing your story. And I love that wrap up because what it beautifully says is let it unfold. Everything that you said was find joy to sustain you through the unfolding. I want to thank you for joining us today. It was just such a treat to hear your unfolding. And to you, the listener, I look forward to continuing to meet you in your unfolding. Until the next one, take care.